First off, rest in peace, neighborhood Nip. I ain't crip, but I'm on that neighborhood shoot. Building business, it's that black owned. If you hustle, better hustle till your pack gone. If you work, better work till your back hurt. And if you rap, make it better than your last verse. Yeah, more lyrics.
AJ, El Presidente, Eddie Kane University. Hill gon' heal, regardless. You, Buchanan, Bethel High School, by way of 3-Man Weave, LLC.
Michelle, producer, Faith over here.
You can catch this wave from the Marlins to the Mariners. Doing things you can't believe. It's the 3-Man Weave.
What's going on, good people? You know, Monday feels good after a good win, so we're coming with you with a good exclusive of the recap of what we thought would be the game of the week, and it actually was still a great game. So before we get started, we'll bring in Kevin Oestreicher with the Locked On Ravens podcast. But first, I do want to give a shout out to your favorite guy, Hill. Hill just welcomed in his new baby girl into the world. They finally made it home today from the hospital. So shout out to you, Hill. Hill's going to be going on some paternity leave. So me and Cannon are going to be holding it down. We will be back here tomorrow on our regularly scheduled program at 7 p.m. So make sure you tune in tomorrow. Make sure you catch us at 3-Man Weave on Instagram, 3-Man Weave _ on Instagram, 3-Man Weave _ on Twitter. Email us all the questions that you may have at podcast.3.man.weave@gmail.com. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube to make sure that you are up on all the content that we are dropping. And join us in our Facebook group because we do have a whole bunch of chatter in that Facebook group, and we might actually get some questions answered that have been posed in that group today. So without further ado, let me bring in my guy, Kevin Oestreicher. You saw him on our divisional roundup repping the Ravens, so he's gonna come in and he's gonna talk to us about that game that took place on Sunday. So with that, Kevin Oestreicher, Locked On Ravens. What's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, look, first of all, great win for the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, look, I am a Ravens guy, but look, this division with Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield and whoever the Steelers decide to put at quarterback is going to be a good one for a long time.
Absolutely. And this was kind of a glimpse of, what the future will hold for this AFC North, because we've already seen what Lamar Jackson is capable of. We saw some of the ascension that Baker Mayfield was kind of on before his injury, even though he has been up and down. But there were questions about what the Bengals have done offensively and just as a team with some of their pieces that they've acquired in the offseason on defense, and can it all come together? And I think this isn't necessarily a changing of the guard, but this is, showing like, hey, we are a force to be reckoned with. What say you about kind of like what you took away from, the Bengals' potential from this game?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of positives to take away. I know that, I agree with you. Those were some of my questions heading into the year for the Cincinnati team. And I was a bit higher on the Bengals, and I think a lot of people heading into this year, I saw a 2-win or 3-win team. I was not on that bandwagon. I thought that they had the potential to be, maybe not a playoff team, but right at the cusp of that. What they're showing now is beyond that. Obviously, they are right in contention for that playoff spot. And when you look at what happened last year with Joe Burrow and what happened when he faced this Ravens defense in his one game that he played, the Ravens confused him with the blitz. He was sacked 7 times. The offensive line was not good for Cincinnati. And he showed poise in the pocket on Sunday. He was able to move around and escape and hit Jamar Chase, who was a huge factor.
Absolutely.
So you're right. I don't think this is a changing of the guard, but it's pretty much saying, hey, there's another team in this AFC North that's going to be good for a very long time. And just with everything that's happened with the Ravens and with the Browns and now the Bengals in here too, you can never count out the Steelers. I mean, with Mike Tomlin as that head coach, you can never do it. This division, as I talked about, they have a lot of star power. And so right now, all 4 AFC North teams are looking good this year, and we'll see how it ends up going. But I think Baltimore, Cincinnati, even Cleveland in there, they're going to be competitive for a long time. And depending on what Pittsburgh does with their quarterback, it could be the same thing.
Absolutely. Coming into the season, there was a lot of talk. Like you said, there was, Cincinnati might still be the worst team in the league. This is, a 2-win team, maybe capped at 5 wins. Personally, like I said in the offseason roundup, I did say their floor should be about 7 games. And that should be what it should take for Zach Taylor to actually be able to keep his job. Now, I know in Cincinnati, they're not going to fire a coach. But to me, just from where we were last year and what was shown, this was a competitive team for the most part. Even in a lot of those losses that took place with the Bengals when Joe Burrow was healthy, they were close. They were in a lot of these games. And so to me, I felt how many injuries that we sustained, not just to Joe Burrow, but let's not forget DJ Reader, who played a real big part in that game. And also that entire defensive front that pretty much was off the street when we played Baltimore last year. There were people coming back. There were some additions made. And Zach Taylor also cleared out some of the pieces that were holdovers from Marvin Lewis, like Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins. And to the fan base, it seemed like a terrible move and something that would lose the locker room. But it seems to have actually galvanized this locker room. And you see a lot of things that you haven't seen from Bengals teams in years past. The guys are active on social media. It's like they love playing here. They go to bat for each other. Mike Hilton, who just got here coming over from Pittsburgh, one of the reasons that he decided to come here is because of that win that they had against Pittsburgh late in the season. He said the team showed a lot of fight. They looked like they were just a few pieces away. And he already has gone to bat and said, hey, extend Jesse Bates in a post-game interview. You had guys like Trey Henderson, who played a big part. He came in and said, it looks like these guys were just a few pieces away. And we let go of a guy like Carl Lawson. And unfortunately, he did suffer another season-ending injury, and it adds to the long list of season-ending injuries that he's had. But it's almost as if this Bengal team is starting to hit on their draft picks. They're actually attracting free agents, and they're hitting on them, unlike years past. So it does seem that there is, not to be cliche and use the Bengals term, but it does seem to be a new day in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think it does too, and I think we're seeing a glimpse. Not everything's perfect, and look, no NFL team is perfect.
Absolutely,
no NFL team has ever been perfect. But I liked a lot of the additions Cincinnati brought in this offseason. Mike Hilton's one of my favorite slot corners in the league. I thought he was great. Larry Ogunjobi, I think, was great. And they're also. It's not like they have to spend all this money. Like DJ Reader 2 offseasons ago, huge addition. He got injured, unfortunately, but this year he's playing great football. But they get BJ Hill for Billy Price. It's like those types of moves that they're under the radar at the time, but then they pay off in a big way. And that's something that the Ravens have done for years. Absolutely. To the point where now you're seeing that with an organization like a Cincinnati Bengals team, and why this AFC North is going to be good for so long, because I like what Andrew Berry's doing in Cleveland. I like what Cincinnati's done, and Baltimore's obviously been one of those organizations. And so is Pittsburgh in terms of just hitting on their draft picks as well. And it does seem like guys want to play there. It seems like there's a change in how the organization carries himself, how the players, the coaches, the staff carries themselves as well. So look, even though I am a Baltimore guy, I have to give credit where credit is due. You can't just completely throw it away and say, look, Cincinnati's a good football team this year. They've shown that. This was a big statement win for them. Absolutely. I know a lot of people had kind of looked at their schedule and looked at who they had won against so far and said, oh, is this team for real? Are they really going to be able to beat a Baltimore team? But look, the fact of the matter is Cincinnati came to play and Baltimore didn't. Now Baltimore has to look themselves in the mirror. I think they will bounce back. They're a very good football team. But we've seen now that, as you mentioned, that New Day thing, that the Cincinnati Bengals, I think, even if they don't make the playoffs this year, if they collapse, I think, they put themselves in a very good position to do so.
Absolutely.
But even if they don't, they have shown growth. And for me, that's been something that I am a very big proponent of. It's very hard to win a Super Bowl at the NFL level. It's very hard to go far in the playoffs at the NFL level. There's only one team at the end of the day who wins the Super Bowl every single season. So for Baltimore, they've shown growth where in Lamar Jackson's first year, he leads them to the AFC North title. They lose in the wild card round. Second year, they have that bye, so they get to the divisional round, but they lose to the Titans. Third year, they end up beating the Titans in the wild card round. So you have that growth of, hey, they won the playoff game, but then they lose to the Titans. Or they lose to the who'd they lose to?
The Chargers.
I blocked it out of my mind because it was so bad.
Yeah, but, that was an ugly one.
They lose to the Chargers and the Titans and the Bills in the divisional round there in 2020. So now this year, I need more growth. I think growth is huge. Also for Cincinnati, where that puts them is even if they don't make the playoffs, they've shown the growth this year. So how can they continue to build on that this year and go in future years? Because if the regression starts to happen, that's when you start to get a bit worried. But for right now, the Bengals are so young and they still have room to add and they still have room to grow. There are so many younger pieces on the offensive side of the ball where you can say, hey, this is not the ceiling. There's still so many more opportunities for them to go out there, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and become better players, much like Lamar Jackson has done, and much like a lot of these other younger guys, like Marquise Brown, for example. So, absolutely. Yes, the loss of the Bills in 2020 was disappointing for Baltimore, but they'll use that as hunger. The Bengals have had a few disappointing years. They've used that as hunger, and even the organization has used it to bring in the right guys and to make the right decisions to not put them on this path right now. So we'll see how Cincinnati continues to grow. But so far, the returns have been amazing for him.
Yeah. So before we jump into this game really quickly, to kind of talk about what you said about seeing growth and, kind of have those steps of going in the right direction. I've actually been very critical of Greg Roman and the offense that he's been running around Lamar Jackson. And it's kind of something that I've echoed with Zach Taylor and how about his scheme and how he's called his play calling and how he's actually using the pieces around Joe Burrow. Sorry. Do you believe Greg Roman is putting Lamar Jackson in the best positions to succeed? Or do you think Lamar Jackson is just so otherworldly talented, it's almost dummy proof? But when it comes to, those tough games, you need that extra little bit to scheme as well.
Yeah, I think for Greg Roman, he's definitely shown growth this year. You look back to 2020 and the pass route concepts were not really there. Guys are running into each other, not getting a lot of separation from each other. And just the game scripts in general weren't amazing to start the season, where the team would start to throw the football and kind of like force it. And it almost seemed like Lamar Jackson and Greg Roman wanted to prove to teams that, hey, we can throw it too. But they weren't using the greatest asset in the run game. When they were averaging 7 yards a carry, 8 yards a carry in games, they would start airing the ball out, and it just wouldn't make sense in that situation. The Ravens can throw the football. That's something they can do, but it's the national media attention of if you get Lamar Jackson behind, he can't come back, and he can't throw if you stop the run game. Well, let's go back to Indianapolis in week 5 where he throws for 442 yards, completes 86% of those passes. He's the narrative destroyer in the NFL. So 100%. I think sometime, Lamar Jackson has come out and said, yeah, look, I'd rather throw the ball than run the ball. And I understand that. He is a quarterback and a really good one at that. But to me, I think that it doesn't matter how you pick up the yards as long as you pick them up. Exactly. I would rather have the Ravens go 99 yards down the field, running the ball every single play, as opposed to them getting 50 and getting stopped because they're throwing it and trying to force that down the field. So this year for Greg Roman, he has improved upon that, adjusting in games. I think adjustments were a bit of a challenge last season. He has adjusted. There have been some quarters and some drives where it's been questionable. And I think against Cincinnati, that kind of all came together and they got down and they got behind. And the run game hasn't really been working for them this year in general because of the losses of J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. But I do believe that he has improved. And is he putting him in the absolute perfect situations? It's hard to say if anybody could do that. Right. But I do think I'm encouraged with what Greg Roman has done this year. But the Cincinnati game was a bit of return to what we saw in 2020. And hopefully he can kind of put that in the rearview mirror and continue to adjust the way that he was kind of earlier in the year.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and jump into this game really quickly. And the final score actually isn't an indicator of what this game really was, because from the first half, and even as we saw that first drive into the second half, it almost looked like, okay, this is the Bengals are competing. They're still in it. They have a chance. So we'll kind of break it down into halves. From the first half, what do you think was the key to, what the Ravens were doing? And did it seem like, that the game plan that they had was actually being successful?
Yeah, I think in the first half, if we start on defense for the Ravens, they were getting pressure on Joe Burrow. The offensive line, for example, Justin Houston was having his way.
Oh, man, I literally said it. I was like, Jonah Williams is getting cooked. Oh, my goodness.
Right. And that's exactly, what they brought in a guy like Justin Houston to do on this football team. And he was 0.5 sacks away from getting that 100 sack. He was close, but he didn't get it at the end of the day. So when you look at the final stats, Cincinnati gets 5 on Lamar Jackson. The Ravens only get 1, I believe, on the Bengals. And in that first half, they were making Joe Burrow move out of the pocket, and they were making him a little bit uncomfortable. But it was the adjustments in the second half, and we'll talk about the second half. But in the first half, the Ravens, it was weird because they couldn't really wrap up and finish Joe Burrow.
Yes.
Like they were getting the pressure, but Joe Burrow was using his escapability and his mobility to kind of work around. Odafe Owe was really close to a sack, and he ended up just missing, and Joe Burrow escapes out. And those are the types of things that Lamar Jackson does, and he did do against Cincinnati. So a little Lamar Jackson-esque there from Burrow. But Burrow, I think, is underrated in terms of his mobility. I think people don't kind of put that in his game. But then you look at what the Ravens are doing on offense, and they were struggling a little bit. And I think they got close, but I know a big controversy point in Baltimore is the fact that the Ravens didn't trot out Justin Tucker when they were on the Bengals 40-yard line. And I know Cincinnati kind of did the same thing where they didn't go for it right around that same area. But to me, I'm trusting Justin Tucker with my life if I have to do it.
The best weapon in the game, to be quite honest. To me, I don't think, and I know I that was something that I really wish I could be inside the head of John Harbaugh on that decision, because we've seen John Harbaugh, go for that 66-yard field goal in Detroit. And we know Justin Tucker has the leg for it. We know that's something that's in his wheelhouse. And I don't know if what the Bengals were doing made him that wary that he didn't want to give them that type of field position. But it wasn't really as if the offense was just clicking on all cylinders. We were having some missteps of our own as being in Cincinnati. And it looked like it was going to be a defensive struggle. So to me, I think you trust your defense at that point of the game and you give Justin Tucker a shot, because what's that, a 57-yarder?
Yeah, I think it's that.
Yeah, I believe that's about a 57-yarder. I think he comfortably makes that on 9 out of the 10 occasions, maybe 10 out of 10. So I think that takes points off of the board. And I believe it does kind of flip the momentum, even if there's not any points necessarily scored off of it. But it's that belief of, okay, this is our guy. Let's get us points on the board. And then game script changes, play calling changes. And, I think Zach Taylor may get a little bit more aggressive, but that didn't seem to be John Harbaugh's forte, because he's usually an aggressive guy, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he is. And I think there were a couple of decisions that went into it. Harbaugh actually elaborated on it and brought up the fact that there was a crosswind, and him hitting from 57 in an outdoor stadium is a little bit more difficult than, in Detroit. Right. That's an indoor stadium with the 66-yarder. So there are factors, and plus the field position battle where, you punt it to Cincinnati, you only gain about 19, 20 yards because you're probably getting a touchback there from the 40. But, for me, I think Justin Tucker has done enough. And, the farther back a kicker goes, the less likely it is to make a field goal. That's
absolutely
just
yes.
But, with Tucker and how he has proven it, I personally would have done it. I don't, necessarily agree or disagree with the decision. I'm kind of in the middle. I think that showed to me that the Ravens were just kind of like, okay, the crosswind is there. We're going to risk it with our defense. And then Cincinnati, I think the second time they did it, because the Ravens did it twice. They sent out the Sam Cook twice. The second time they did it, they get the 20 yards, there's a touchback, and then 2 or 3 plays later, Cincinnati scores a touchdown anyway. So it's kind of like those, in hindsight, they should have done it or they shouldn't have done it. Absolutely. I understand why he decided not to, because, look, crosswinds are real. That ball can move wherever it wants to go on those crosswinds.
Trust me, I'm very familiar with that Packers game, what crosswinds can
do. So that's where we thank Justin Tucker in Baltimore that, sometimes we don't have to go through that. But, if I'm the head coach, I'm kicking the field goal, but John Harbaugh's the head coach. He made that decision. So I think that was a big turning point in the game personally, but Cincinnati, and we'll talk about it, came to play in the second half, and that's to me where the game ultimately did change.
Absolutely. And so one thing for me that was quite concerning in the first half, you can see with the game plan that they had, they wanted to come out and pretty much stay away from Marlon Humphrey, and it was game plan was T. Higgins. And it's almost like, I don't know if it just seemed to be good coverage, but T. Higgins just didn't seem to be there. He seemed to be off. He didn't seem to be the T. Higgins that we saw last year against Everett. And so do you think that he has actually, kind of taken those strides to actually be solid as a number 2 with Marcus Peters out for you guys? Or do you think he just kind of, had, the game of his life where he just played out of his body and he matched up well with the T. Higgins? Or do you think it was more T. Higgins kind of not being engaged?
Yeah, I think that Averett's proven himself as a number 2 so far this year. He had a really bad game at Indianapolis in week
Yes.
5. You know, he was getting targeted every single play, and he was getting cooked the whole game. I mean,
Absolutely.
he'll tell you that. Anybody will tell you that. But he responded well in week 6 against Los Angeles, and then in week 7, as you mentioned it, that first quarter, every single throw it seemed like was going to T. Higgins with Averett on him.
Yes.
And Averett held his ground, and he's done that throughout the whole year outside of week 5. And that's where I've been impressed, because the loss of a player like Marcus Peters hurts a defense so much, especially with the types of gambles he takes, with his football IQ, with his ability to change a game with literally one play. I mean, in Cincinnati, during his first season, he had that pick 6 on, I think it was Ryan Finley.
Yes.
And, you know, that the Ravens were winning that game, but still, it's just those types of game-breaking plays.
Absolutely.
So with Averett, he was solid for them in coverage in 2020 when Jimmy Smith had to miss some games, and he was in there kind of filling in. And this is now his next step. And the Ravens, their 2018 draft class had guys like Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews and Averett and Deshaun Elliott and Bradley Bozeman. I mean, they're going to have to make some decisions.
Absolutely.
They made it on Mark Andrews. I'm assuming Lamar Jackson's staying in Baltimore. But there are all these different types of players, and Averett has proven himself. But now it's a matter of, can you keep a guy like Marlon Humphrey and a player like Marcus Peters, and also pay Anthony Averett, who has proven so far that he's probably going to get a decently big contract with the second one, because he's played that well this way through the year. So, you know, for Higgins in general, I know he's looked a bit off at times this year. I don't know where that comes from. I mean, I can see it, but I think he's too talented of a player to not rebound. I mean, I loved Higgins coming out of the draft. There were rumors that the Ravens were going to take Higgins in the first round of that draft instead of Patrick Queen. So I do like what he brings to the table, and with him and Boyd and obviously Chase, that's a 3-headed monster that no one wants to deal with each and every week. So Higgins gives you the physical profile, you know, but people go through sophomore slumps. You know, I think this might just be one of those things where, unfortunately for Higgins, he's adjusting, and that happens. You know, it's not something that you have to overly panic about, because Higgins showed in his rookie season and flashes this year as well that he is a guy that can go out there and give the Bengals a ton of production. So I'm going to give the credit to Averett and not necessarily bash Higgins for being off, but I do think that, you know, there's always room to improve for players. I think Higgins can certainly do it, but I've been impressed with Averett this year.
Absolutely. And so one thing that I wanted to make note of, coming prior to this game, you know, some of the stats that have come out, and they ranked Joe Burrow as one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL when faced with the blitz. And we all know that Wink Martindale, he's going to send the house to you, and he's going to try and give you looks, and he's going to try and confuse you. And he proved that against Justin Herbert. Do you think that may have actually backfired with him being, Wink, relying on, getting the pressure, manning up, and, hoping that they can confuse you with a guy who is, as cerebral and able to process the field like Joe Burrow? Do you think that was one of the things that really was the downfall for the Ravens on Sunday?
Yeah, I think that with the pressure the Ravens got in the first game, I think it would have been crazy not to at least try it and see where it got them, because it really won them the game. It was one of the key reasons why they won that game in week 5. Now, obviously, this is a different Cincinnati team, a different Joe Burrow. This is second-year Joe Burrow, not rookie Joe Burrow. But Burrow really showed me a lot of poise in that pocket, especially when faced with the pressure. And I think the Bengals offensive line got better as the game went on. They did not start off extremely strong, but they ended up getting better as the game went on. So I think that with Burrow and with the Ravens and their blitzes, they will send literally everybody up to that line and say, look, you're going to try to decide who's coming, and we'll drop everybody back, or we'll send the house. So those looks can be so confusing. And I think what we saw when looking at week 6 versus week 7, Justin Herbert was facing that Ravens defense for the first time.
Right.
And it's been proven over these last couple of seasons with Martindale at the helm that rookies, second-year guys, third-year players who are seeing the Ravens defense for the first time have a lot of trouble, because it's just such a complex defense. When Earl Thomas was in Baltimore, and we know what happened there, but when Earl Thomas was in Baltimore, he had trouble picking up the defense. So even for players in the defense, it can be really tough just to figure out, where their keys are, what their assignments are, if they're blitzing, if they're not. It's so difficult. So for a rookie quarterback who's never seen that before, or second year, whoever, I think that's part of the reason why we saw Joe Burrow struggle so much against Baltimore in week 5 of last year. And then now, when we look to week 7 of this year, we see the vast improvement because his weapons have gotten better, his offensive line has gotten better, and he has gotten better. The Ravens defense also, they've seen improvements from guys, but now it's kind of like what we saw with Patrick Mahomes in week 2, where the Ravens tried to blitz him earlier in their matchups, back a couple years ago, and he's just incredible against the blitz. So what they had to do and what they did in week 2 was kind of send a delayed blitzer or a spy type of guy to see, all right, is Joe Burrow going to escape this way or that way? Or in this case, it was Mahomes. But, you look at it, and I think I saw a ton of improvement. And I'm excited to see, honestly, when these two teams match up again, both how the Ravens and the Bengals will adjust, because I think this was a wake-up call. I think we saw for the Ravens, in Detroit, they don't win without that 4th and 19 and without a 66-yard field goal. In week 5 against Indianapolis, they don't win without that massive historic comeback. In week 2, it was a very close game. So after wins, your outlook's a lot different than after losses. And especially after a loss like this, I think the Ravens, they'll bounce back, they'll recover, but they have to look themselves in the mirror and figure themselves out. Meanwhile, in Cincinnati, everything's great there right now, as it should be. They've proven that, hey, not only can we beat up on these other teams that don't have a great record, but we just beat one of the great teams in the AFC and in the NFL. So now how can they build on that?
Yes, and like I said before we got on, this game wasn't really indicative of the final score. It was a lot closer than what the final score would actually show. And so to me, that actually is a lot more comforting to me as a, as a Bengals guy, to see, for the potential outlook, because it wasn't just like from the onstart, it's just like every single thing was going the Bengals' way. It was a competitive game. It was a close game, and it was some back and forth. And even going into the second half, that pass to Hollywood Brown, you can't throw it better than that. You can't draw it up any better than that. And so it's almost like, how are these guys going to respond? And in years past, you would think, okay, it's almost going to start, crumbling. An underrated key to victory to me was the fact that Bengals didn't get penalized, and they played an extremely clean game when it comes to penalties and also when it comes to turnovers. Literally, it would have been a flawless game had Joe Burrow not thrown that interception into the end zone to, I believe it was Marlon Humphrey. And so I think that's really the only blemish that you can come up with. And so you're not going to play that way every single game, but it does give you hope, and it gives you that motivation. Guys, we can do this. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, not the final score. It's what they can do and what they can do on the field when they play discipline, when they, stick to their job and just do what they're supposed to do.
And that's a big part of it. You mentioned how it was close. This was a 13-10 game at the end of the first half. The Ravens take the lead with that pass you mentioned from Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown. And you're right. Look, the Bengals went 4-13 on third down. So it wasn't like the Ravens had trouble stopping them on third down. They had trouble stopping them everywhere else, which was the key issue. But, this was a competitive game up until that point. And I agree, the Bengals responded very nicely and very well. And it seemed like in the first half, you mentioned it earlier, it looks like a defensive struggle almost, where you had two high-powered offenses, but they just weren't clicking. And it was like, all right, whichever one clicks first, this has the potential to really get ugly. And I had tweeted out, I had said, look, the Ravens defense was playing well in the first half. They were getting pressure. They were stopping on third down. They had Jamar Chase beat Jimmy Smith for a fourth down play. But look, overall, they were stopping the Bengals. So I said, if the Ravens defense continues to play like that and the Ravens offense clicks, they have the potential to blow the game open. Now, that's probably my worst tweet in history because it ended up going the other way. But, it was really a matter of, look, it's who is going to come out with this victory based off of how they respond coming out of that locker room. And the Ravens responded well coming out of the locker room with that touchdown pass. But then Cincinnati comes back, and the Ravens pride themselves on not giving up big plays. They prefer to give up the underneath stuff and kind of play that bend, don't break defense. Well, the Bengals had like 4 long touchdowns in this game. So
yes.
The Ravens, the defensive communication, I think, was struggling a little bit. The missed tackles have been awful for them this year. I think they came into this game tied for the league lead in missed tackles, and I think after this game, they'll definitely have sole possession of first place because it was just bad. That was bad. Credit to the Bengals. I talked with Chris Rowling of the Bengals Wire, and he said that CJ Uzomah was someone to look out for in this game, and on National Tight Ends Day, he cooks up this Ravens defense. So the Bengals have weapons outside of their big three. Joe Mixon obviously has a long touchdown run, so much of Pirine, same thing. So the Bengals have weapons, and they use those weapons to their advantage on Sunday in a game where they got punched in the mouth coming out of that second half locker room, and they responded in a big way.
Yeah, and there, I mentioned the Hollywood Brown touchdown, but there was also a play that I felt could actually be the turning point in the game as well. And it was that fumble on that catch by Jamar Chase on the sideline, and how it got kicked out of bounds. And I believe it was Gene Steratore who gave a great explanation on it. But as a Bengals guy, it's almost just like, are we going to get hosed on this? What I want to know is what does what's the rumbling and the feel amongst Ravens Nation about that play? Do they feel that they got jobbed or they got the short end of the stick? Do they feel like that was something that should have gone their way and was pivotal in the changing of the direction of this game?
Yeah, I think look, if that was ruled a fumble and the Ravens had the clear recovery and that was that, I think it could have been a huge turning point. But those are the type, it just seemed like the ball wasn't bouncing the Ravens' way the entire game. I mean, you look at, I think it was the fourth quarter where Calais Campbell tips up a pass in the air and it gets caught by T. Higgins anyway. And this is like, okay, this is what this game is.
Yep.
Right. So another play, and it's funny you mentioned that, the play, I think it was maybe the first or second play of the third quarter with the Mark Andrews fumble that was recovered by Mark Andrews. So, that ball bounced the Ravens' way, but if the Bengals recovered that football, the Bengals won anyway in convincing fashion. But that's another play where it's like, all right, if the ball just bounces like 1 inch the other way, it could be different. And I think that, I think it was the correct call. Unfortunately for Ravens fans, it's like, oh, it's bad because it didn't go the Ravens' way. Like, I understand that. I've felt that way before, but Chase clearly kicked it, and he was out of bounds, and it could have gone either way. The Ravens, if Jamar Chase didn't kick it, Chuck Clark had that recovery in bounds, I think it was, or maybe it was Patrick Queen. But those are the types of plays that literally, we were talking about it with Marcus Peters, can define a game. And I think, the Ravens had an opportunity to get back in it kind of with the Marlon Humphrey interception. I think that was a play where if their offense could have gone down the field and scored, maybe they could have made it a football game. But at that point, stuff had already happened, and it's a little bit, okay. So there were opportunities. The Ravens, the offense was just flat for most of the day. The run game, Lamar Jackson had 7.3 yards per carry the entire game. Non-Lamar Jackson ball carriers had just 2.3. So, Lamar Jackson is carrying this offense right now. He's doing it all, and he's a phenomenal player. But, he has the help in the wide receiver room. He needs it from his run game. And I get how it's difficult without J.K. Dobbins, without Gus Edwards. Ronnie Stanley is on IR. Nick Boyle hasn't come back yet. Their star right tackle and Patrick Makari just went out with an injury himself. So they're beat up. They're beat up on offense, but this team has high expectations for themselves. And I know this is a game they're not going to be satisfied with. Calais Campbell said it's going to sting, it's going to burn, but I think they're confident in themselves. But it's plays like those, the fumbles and the bounces, that can tilt the game in one direction or the other. But the Bengals had this one, I think, from the first possession they had in the second half all the way to.
So has there been any word on the severity of Makari's ankle injury? Do we know kind of what happened there?
Yeah, so it's a high ankle sprain. Ian Rappaport reported that. So it's going to be a few weeks. And, it's like the physicians the Ravens can't afford the injuries at.
Yeah.
It's happened. So it's looking like it's going to be Tyree Phillips right now. Phillips is kind of like a swing tackle guy. He can play. He should be playing at guard, but, the Ravens just have to put people elsewhere because they just don't have any people. So I wouldn't expect the Ravens to sit quietly during this trade deadline. I think they could make at least one move. The issue is that they have so many people on IR and money committed to people on IR that it's like, all right, how much can they really spend on an acquisition or a free agent at this point if it's not the minimum? So Makari's going to be out for a few weeks. That's really tough. He had one of the highest pass block win rates in the league coming into this game. And with Ronnie Stanley out, who's an all-pro, you're looking at Alejandro Villanueva, who got worked by Trey Hendrickson the entire game. And then Tyree Phillips, who did not play a great game on Sunday against Cincinnati. So they have some work to do there. Hopefully they can figure it out, but we'll see.
Absolutely. And, you hate to see it with those high ankle sprains, but hopefully, the Ravens are able to, put something together, patch something together. And like you said, I am never going to count them out, especially by how they maneuver with the deals. And so who knows what they're going to work up at the trade deadline. I do want to ask you a question, because for so long, in Cincinnati, they've considered A.J. Green as the Ravens killer, because we've known A.J. Green to have some monstrous games against Baltimore. The pass where he's getting guys bumping into each other, taking it, to ice the game, things along those lines. How did seeing Jamar Chase break that 80-yarder make you feel? And was it almost just like a flashback? Like, okay, now we have to deal with him for 10 years.
No, man. Well, hopefully we're not going to get any tip-toe Marys at the buzzer. They go the Bengals' way. But I mean, yeah, it's hard not to think about just what AJ Green did to this Ravens team for so many years in Cincinnati, and then see Jamar Chase burn this team for 200 yards, 201 to be exact, and not kind of have those flashbacks. And to his credit, I know a lot of people were, I know you're probably tired of talking about it, but the Sewell versus Chase debate. And it's all right. Well, if the Bengals don't get the tackle, then, they're not going to be able to protect Burrow. I personally didn't care either way. I was 51-49 Sewell, but I'm like, if they take Chase, I mean, what a receiver trio they would have. And
Exactly.
Now we're seeing, with Jonah Williams and Riley Reif and Jackson Carman, look, there's no Bobby Hart. I think that's a win. But looking at it with, exactly, this Ravens team and seeing what AJ Green did to them for so many years. And on that touchdown, the big one that he broke, I mean, I talked about the missed tackles, and you see guys just whiffing on Jamar Chase. You see Deshaun Elliott whiff on Uzama, and it's those types of plays where if you make the tackle, it's like a 6-yard gain. You play the next play, and that's that.
Yes.
That didn't happen. There's a long touchdown, another long touchdown, another one. So look, they have to get better. John Harbaugh acknowledged it. The team acknowledged it. But Jamar Chase is a special talent. And I think, if I have a hunch that the next time these two teams meet up, it's going to be Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins doing the work, because the Ravens are going to do everything. And not that they didn't, but they're going to make sure that Jamar Chase doesn't beat him. And look, maybe he's so good that he can do it again, even with all that attention. But I think that we'll see more Tyler Boyd and more T. Higgins next time these two teams face off, because Jamar Chase, I mean, single coverage on him, it just isn't going to work, because
Absolutely.
He's so dynamic as an athlete, can beat you deep and work over the middle of the field. He did it all against Baltimore, and I think this was the Ravens. Hey, look, they might have gotten rid of AJ Green in the division, but there's a new guy in town that might give you some issues.
Absolutely. And that's actually why in my head, I felt this would be a T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd game, because we all know who Marlon Humphrey is. We all know what he's capable of. And so I actually felt Marlon Humphrey, with his physicality and the way he plays, would actually make things rough for Jamar Chase. And Jamar Chase has always talked about how he likes corners to play him physical, but I didn't think saying that in the NFL, with the toughest task that you faced all year, he would do things like this. And we've seen a lot of the highlights from Jamar Chase this season with, the 50-yard passes, the 60-yard touchdowns, things along those lines. But an underrated, which I don't think should be underrated, part of his game is his elite route running. And he's so smooth with his routes. If you actually watch him on the field, he doesn't look very fast. He's just extremely smooth. He's extremely physical. And next thing you know, he's pulling away from you. And he has the subtleties of a veteran in his route running. And I think that's why he's come in and he's been able to kind of do some of the things that he's been able to do. And that's also why I was such a proponent of drafting Jamar Chase, because to me, if you look at how the NFL is going, you want to spread these teams out and you want to spread their talent out thin. And now if my third guy is Tyler Boyd, maybe T. Higgins, I'm almost certainly my third guy is better than your third guy. And what I've always said, and I mentioned in our roundup that you joined us on, the reason why I was such a fan is because the draft is not one round. We're not fixing our team by just this first round draft pick. It's 7 rounds, and we have some players that we feel can step in. And a lot of the top teams, they don't always have the best offensive line in the game. I just felt as if you can give Joe Burrow some time. You don't have, and it was really just that entire right side where you had Bobby Hart and you had Alex Redmond right next to him. That's where all the pressure came from. And then, you sprinkle in Michael Jordan at left guard. It's like, okay, get Bobby Hart's ass out of town. You fix that with Riley Reif. Quentin Spain, he's there. He's healthy. And he's actually playing out of his mind right now. He's actually very highly rated, according to PFF, amongst guards. And so it's really just now the only weakness is, unfortunately, in that right guard and center area with Jackson Carman, who's a rookie, who's been up and down, which you expect as a rookie. But then also Trey Hopkins, who's coming off that ACL injury. But it's more than serviceable. And we can see that now. And like you said, it wasn't perfect. There's been tons of communication issues. Justin Houston, he was getting a lot of wins. They're making Joe Burrow move in the pocket. But like you said, Joe Burrow is very, very athletic inside the pocket, and he can move. And so we saw that on that long pass, that 50-yard pass to CJ Uzama. As he's rolling out, he notices, I think it was the end who was trying to cut him off on the rollout, but he just takes it up, steps up in the pocket, and he fires a perfect pass. So I think that pick with Jamar Chase unlocked a lot more in this offense than it would have had we still brought in Penei Sewell and either, kept AJ Green or possibly just added another late round receiver. I think it's, paying off dividends. And to me, it's almost like, yeah, Kyle Pitts, he's really starting to show in Atlanta. But to me, it's almost like Jamar Chase was the perfect pick.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what the Ravens went through with Rashad Bateman in a way, because they had drafted Marquise Brown 2 years ago.
Yes.
And people were saying, well, why would you invest another first-round pick in a run-heavy offense and a wide receiver? But with Bateman, you mentioned it with Jamar Chase's route running. Rashad Bateman's also a phenomenal route runner, and that's a part of his game.
He was very surprising in how well he performed on Sunday, and I really came away impressed with Rashad Bateman. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're okay. Yeah, you're good. And for Rashad Bateman, he's caught 7 passes through his 2 games. All 7 have gone for a first down. So like he's a chain mover. He's impressed me. And it's those types of subtleties in players' games, like with Jamar Chase and with Rashad Bateman, that sometimes can get them undervalued. Like I would have loved Jamar Chase in Baltimore. I think a lot of people would have loved Jamar Chase on their football team. But, based off of where the Ravens were picking and who would have been available and what the draft capital to trade up would be, I thought Bateman was the perfect pick for them. They had other weaknesses on their team, but the Ravens are a good drafting team anyway, to where that they could say, hey, look, let's take a talent here who we know is going to help our offense and make it more explosive. And then we can adjust the other issues elsewhere. Now, the issue for the Ravens is they didn't draft a tackle. They didn't draft a defensive. So it's kind of like, all right, they're drafting a fullback in the 5th round. What are you doing? That pick was scrutinized by a lot of people.
I can imagine.
I think that the Bateman pick and even the Owe pick at 31, which has turned out very well for them.
That was a great pick. Yes.
Right. It's stuff where now Cincinnati, they picked the receiver, but now it's all right. How are you going to respond in the 2nd round and the 3rd round and the 4th round and kind of build your team around not only Joe Burrow, but around the weapons that he's been given? And for me, it all starts up front. I mean, you have to have a good offensive line in the NFL to win football games, both with the run and with the pass. And, no team's there are always going to be holes on a team. It's not like every single player is going to be an all-pro on an NFL roster. So the Bengals, I think, having a more than serviceable offensive line is a good thing right now. They can improve that in free agency, improve that in the draft. But I've been impressed with Jamar Chase, and I think he's not going anywhere for a long time, and he'll be terrorizing the AFC North and the rest of the NFL for a long time. But I think Rashad Bateman, some things to be said for him too, is he gets more ramped up and he starts to play more games.
Absolutely, and that was actually one of the picks from this entire division that kind of put fear in me the most. Was like, we've been like here on 3 Man, we've always said you need to get Lamar a true outside threat, someone who can go up and get it, be a big body on possession catches, but also have the ability to break it loose and make a big play. And you can see that, as you said, all of his catches have gone for first downs. So he's a playmaker. He has a nose for playmaking, but he's also going to give Lamar that catch radius. Yes, Hollywood Brown is dynamic, but Lamar Jackson is going to need someone with a catch radius because, he's on the move a lot. He does throw on the run a lot. And I don't think he's a run first quarterback. I think he's a very willing passer and he will stand in the pocket. But as we've seen with some of the injuries that have happened along that offensive front, he is going to be on the move sometimes. He is going to get pressure sometimes. And with that run-heavy offense, you're going to roll him out sometimes. And when you're on the move, sometimes you don't make the most accurate passes. And I'm not saying that he's not accurate, but you're just not as accurate when you're standing in the pocket. And so adding that big body with catch radius, I think is only going to help. And as Rashad Bateman gets in the swing of things coming back from that injury, I think the sky's the limit for him. So I am interested to see how he plays against the Bengals the second time this season and just how the Ravens offense looks as the season goes on and he gets more comfortable and he gets those legs under him. So one thing I want to ask you, after Sunday, where do you actually see the Ravens going from here? Do you still see them as the number 1 team in the AFC North, or do you have a little cause for pause that this division actually might be up for grabs completely?
Yeah, I think all along, I think the division's been up for grabs. I think That's been my inkling from the start of the year, just because there's so many talented teams. But, Cleveland's struggling with injuries. Pittsburgh, I don't know where they stand right now. They're very inconsistent, I feel like, at this point. And now it's Baltimore and it's Cincinnati, to where, hey, look, Cleveland can definitely get back into things, with their injury situation. They're getting some guys back. Nick Chubb is going to play in week 8 here. But I think that it's all going to come down to scheduling. And Cincinnati's schedule, I glanced over it. They have a lot of winnable games. And that's not to say, Cincinnati's not a good team because they don't have hard teams to play. Every team at the NFL level can beat you. So you have to figure that into it. Baltimore's back half of their schedule is brutal. And they play 5 of their last 7 games against divisional opponents. And the 2 that aren't divisional opponents are the Green Bay Packers and the Los Angeles Rams. So that's a really tough back half. And it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to things, because, losing games earlier in the year, that's not going to bode well for them when you get to week 16, week 17. And all of a sudden, if you have 4 losses, you can't afford to drop as many games later in the year. Now, the Ravens have 2 losses, a 5-2 record, considering all the injuries they've gone through, all the shuffling they've had to do, how resilient they've had to be. I mean, that's impressive to me, but Cincinnati's also been impressive just because they've come out to play football every single week. They've also been resilient. Now, there has to be some luck involved with every NFL team, every single team in the league, with injuries and with the ability to play clean football. Cincinnati did both of those things really well against the Ravens in week 7. You mentioned, I think they only had 1 total penalty in the game, and it came with 2 minutes left in the fourth.
Yeah, it was it was back when I think it was like the starters were already out, and it was the 6 offensive linemen.
Right. So, you look at the game early, and even in the middle of the fourth quarter up until that point, the Bengals played clean football. They also haven't had a ton of major injuries to say, hey, this could really hurt our season. And, you go back to the Ravens in 2019, they didn't have a ton of major injuries either. Tavon Young, they lost for the year. They lost Pernell McPhee. Other than that, though, they were a healthy team. And sometimes that's what it takes to really get yourself in a good position to make the playoffs. So I'm not knocking Cincinnati for being healthy. I think that'd be a foolish thing to do. But I think they're taking the most advantage of the opportunities that they can get. So in the AFC North, I think it's a 3-team race between Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. No particular order or anything. I think Pittsburgh is still talented. I just don't think they have the firepower to keep up with these 3 teams. And if Cincinnati can continue to take advantage of their easier schedule and continue to win football games, it doesn't matter who you play. It doesn't matter how you get there. You just have to get there. So I think that we'll look at this team and this division after the regular season concludes, and I think we'll see a close down to the wire battle that really could come down to tiebreakers, in all honesty.
Absolutely. And coming into the season, I looked at the Bengals schedule, and it seemed like we have a brutal back half of the schedule. If we don't win some of these games early, it's going to be a long season. As things have progressed, like it does always in the NFL, there's always going to be turnover. Things aren't always what you see. The entire back half of the schedule seems extremely winnable. There's not a game anymore that looks like that is a loss, because now the 49ers, they don't look as good as we expected them to look. The Chiefs don't look as good as they expect them to look. Steelers, they are kind of up and down, and the Browns are dealing with tons of injuries right now. So I think if the Bengals are able to maintain this level of health and this level of play, they're definitely going to be a threat to win this division. And I've said if they are able to get in the playoffs, because before the season I said about 7 to 9 wins, if they can sneak into the playoffs with the type of mentality Joe Burrow has, I think he's going to be able to deliver the Bengals fans their first playoff win. But now I think this team is talented enough to actually be a threat to get I won't say a bye week, because now there's, only 1 bye week with the schedule. But I think they're talented enough to get a home game, and who knows what can happen once they get into the playoffs. And I think they match up pretty well with almost every team in the AFC. And if they can get healthy play from Trey Waynes, I think they would be an actual contender to make a run. But I do think that regardless of Sunday, I think Baltimore is still the cream of the crop in this division until otherwise proven. So before I get you out of here, I need your final record prediction for the Baltimore Ravens.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's crazy because I had them at 13-4 before the injuries happened. and they're sitting at 5-2 at the bye week. I could see this team is I think worst case a 10-win team. I think they could get up to 13, but I'm going to put them at 12-5.
Okay,
I think
that's where I see them.
that they have a couple of tough games left. I mentioned that back half of the schedule, and honestly, I think this loss will be good for them. It hurts to lose a game. I understand that. Like you never want to lose, but sometimes you need a loss to really open your eyes to what can be fixed and how a team can improve. And I think now with this Cincinnati team doing that to them, and this was a team that the Ravens had dominated every single game Lamar Jackson had played against them as a starter. So now let's look, the Bengals in the John Harbaugh era, when those two teams match up, the Ravens have the advantage by 1. It's 14-13 in favor of the Ravens. So these two teams outside of the last 5 have always been, I think it's been a very competitive,
Absolutely.
Rivalry is the right word. I don't know. I don't think they have like bad blood between each other or anything, but I do think that the Bengals are here to stay. And this 2021 Bengals team kind of reminds me of what we saw from the 2019 Ravens, where people were having some questions. How could Joe Burrow respond to his injury? Could Jamar Chase be that guy for him? It was like Lamar Jackson. Can Lamar Jackson take that next step? Can the weapons be enough? The Ravens took the league by storm. Nobody could figure him out. And they had a really great season despite playing some really good football teams. And for Cincinnati, they kind of have that same issue. Like they're young, they're exciting, they have all these great talents and these great players. And I think that they have the potential to do a lot of good things, but it's going to be all on, and we talked about it, how they can respond to me. So I still think Baltimore does win the division at the end of the day, but I think that Cincinnati, the way that they've played and the way that they've proven themselves this year, are a definite playoff contender at the very least. And I'm excited to see what they can do.
Absolutely. And once again, I want to thank you, Kevin, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. You're welcome back anytime. Once again, thanks for joining us. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, this was a blast. I'm happy to come back at any time you need me. I'm on Twitter at ChaosStriker34. I also host and produce the Locked On Ravens podcast. We're on both video and audio form 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. You can find that both, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or just on YouTube in video form. I also write. I'm a managing editor over at Ravens Wire, so I write about the Ravens 7 days a week. I'm pretty entrenched in Ravens stuff, if you couldn't tell. So a lot of Ravens stuff going on. But thanks again for having me on. I really did have a blast.
Absolutely. So thank you, man. And we'll definitely talk soon and prepare for that second matchup.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited for it.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
And once again, that was Kevin Oestreicher, Ravens Wire managing editor, Locked On Ravens podcast. And thank you all for joining us. It's AJ El Presidente. Got my red cup here today. It feels good to have a Monday victory. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at 3 Man Weave. Hit that thumbs up, give us the like on the video, and also hit that bell icon so that we are able to update you on all of our upcoming content. Hit us up on Instagram or Twitter at 3manweave_. We posting memes daily. Join into the Facebook group if you want to have some good sports talk. It's a whole bunch of trash talking going on in there with, throughout all sports. And we just have some fun in there, good memes and all that stuff and good times. And if you have any questions, hit us up at podcast.3.man.weave@gmail.com. And I see my boy, Andy Hopper, in here. Hey, guess what? I'm going to be talking to my boy Andy soon. So stay tuned. I'm going to drop that link to y'all also. So for Hill, Cannon, I'm AJ. It's the 3 Man Weave. And we out, baby.